A silver spoon, a cold corpse, and a direction no compass could explain. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Where are you joining from today? Drop it in the comments below. I always look forward to reading your thoughts. Let's uncover the truth. It was 10 minutes past 11 on a Wednesday morning in late October, and I had just gotten back from a walk I hadn't particularly wanted to take. Fritz had kicked me out of the kitchen because apparently a man can't hover like a vulture while he's crafting veal medallions with a red wine reduction. I don't hover, I monitor, but I know when I'm outvoted in a one-man kitchen dictatorship, so I took my hat and my patience out for a lap around the block. When I returned, I found a woman in the front room and Nero Wolfe already regretting it. She was perched on the edge of the red armchair, like she hadn't quite decided to sit down. She was maybe 35, maybe 40, with careful lighting, and dressed like she had money, but didn't want to admit to it out loud. Her coat was grey cashmere. The bag on the floor next to her cost more than my weekly retainer, and the look she was giving Wolfe had the shine of polite desperation. "I told your assistant," she said to Wolfe, meaning me naturally, "that I don't need a private detective. I need someone who notices what other people miss." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered, which is as much enthusiasm as he shows when he's invited to leave the house or consider a new client before lunch. "Miss," I prompted, flipping open my notebook more out of habit than hope. She hesitated. "Bennington. Claire Bennington. I work at the Metropolitan Museum. I'm an assistant curator. Decorative arts." That was when she reached into her bag and brought out the spoon. It wasn't in a case or wrapped in cloth or even particularly clean. It was tarnished in a charming sort of way, silver, maybe 6 inches long, with a floral handle and a flat oval bowl. Just a spoon. Except for the angle, it was bent, not like someone had dropped it or twisted it for fun, but like it had been shaped to point. North, maybe. It looked like a ladle that had given up halfway. She held it out to Wolfe as if offering an olive branch to a very grumpy bear. "This is why I'm here." Wolfe didn't take it. He didn't even lean forward. His eyes flicked toward it, then closed. "Madam, a spoon." "Yes, I know. But it isn't just a spoon." Or it wasn't. It was part of an exhibit, a small one, 18th century silverwork. I curated it myself. That spoon, she looked at it like it had personally betrayed her, was perfectly straight last Friday. I packed it myself. Wolfe opened his eyes. I could already feel him shifting mentally from dismissive to intrigued. But you wouldn't know it from his voice. Someone tampered with an exhibit. A trifling act of mischief, possibly by a visitor. Museums are not impervious to the petty antics of the public. "No one saw anything," she said. "There are cameras. The cabinet was never opened. The locks weren't forced, and yet this morning it was pointing." Wolfe grunted. She looked at me now. "I don't expect you to believe me, but this wasn't just vandalism. It was a message. I don't know what it means yet, but I know it was deliberate. It was for me." Wolfe sighed. "Miss Bennington, I sympathize, though reluctantly, with your distress, but you have brought me an altered utensil. I'm not an interpreter of riddles delivered by crockery." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very softly, "My mother worked for the Met 30 years. She was the head of acquisitions until she retired last year. Last month she died. She fell down the stairs at home. They said it was an accident. I agreed." Wolfe didn't move. She set the spoon down on the table gently, like it might explode. But this spoon, it wasn't even supposed to be in the exhibit. I added it last minute. From a private collection she helped build years ago. Something about the angle, the way it was posed. I felt like she was telling me something. And then this twist. It's not art, it's a sign, and I need to know from whom. Wolfe grunted again. That one was deeper. I was about to step in, escort her out politely, maybe suggest she see a medium instead of a detective, when Wolfe said the 4 words I hadn't expected before noon. "I will take it." She blinked. "You will?" "I have an interest in signals," Wolfe said. "In misdirection, in the quiet geometry of warnings. That spoon, if it is a sign, was meant to be subtle, but not unnoticed. That is intriguing." She sat back, finally letting herself use the chair for its intended purpose. "I'll pay your usual rate," she added quickly, "and I'll make sure the Met cooperates to the extent that it can." "That," Wolfe said, "would be wise." I leaned over and picked up the spoon. It was heavier than it looked. The bend was clean, deliberate, like she'd said. Not forced or damaged, almost sculptural. I pocketed it because we didn't exactly have a reliquary for mysterious cutlery. After she left, Wolfe stared at the empty chair for a full minute, before speaking. "There are 5 possible origins for that spoon's transformation," he said. "An insider with access to the display, an external intruder capable of bypassing security, a mistake in the packing or installation process, a psychological aberration on Miss Bennington's part, or a message intended not for the public, but for a single, specific viewer." He looked at me. "I want to know which." "Sure," I said. "But just to confirm, you're not interested in art vandalism. You're interested in cryptic utensil messaging from the dead." "Don't be asinine," I grinned. "No promises?" He waved a hand. "The museum. Talk to the security chief, the exhibit registrar, anyone who had proximity to the cabinet between Friday and this morning. Also inquire discreetly about Miss Bennington's mother, her employment record, her retirement, her death. Got it. And take Saul if needed." That was how I knew Wolfe was serious. Saul Panzer isn't. Window dressing. If Wolfe calls Saul, the air has already started to thicken. As I headed out, I gave the spoon one last look. It wasn't just bent, it had been posed, like a compass needle fixed toward something, or someone, north by northwest maybe, or straight. Into trouble. Either way, I was on the case. It didn't take me long to figure out that the Met's idea of cooperation was to assign me a minder. She met me just past the security checkpoint on the staff entrance, name badge, clipboard, blazer, with sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a face that said, "I don't know who you are." And I'm already behind schedule because of it. "Archie Goodwin," I said, offering a hand. She shook it like it was an obligation. "Kristen Lynn, assistant registrar." "That mean you keep track of the spoons?" "It means I log and supervise all incoming and outgoing exhibition pieces, including insurance records, provenance histories, and transportation details." She arched an eyebrow. "And yes, that includes the spoons." The woman was sharp as a scalpel and about as cuddly. Wolfe would have liked her. From a distance. We took the elevator up to the 4th floor, decorative arts and sculpture. She didn't. Make small talk. I didn't press. The gallery was closed for maintenance, which meant we had it to ourselves except for a janitor polishing a railing 20 feet away and a guy on a ladder fiddling with a spotlight. Kristen led me to the cabinet. In question, waist-high, temperature-controlled, and gleaming like it had just finished a career in a jewelry ad. Inside were 8 silver pieces laid out in velvet nests. 7 of them were perfectly symmetrical and peacefully inert. The 8th, the one I'd removed earlier, had left a conspicuous gap in the lineup. Kristen gestured toward it. "That's where it was. Who else had access to this case between Friday and this morning?" She checked her tablet. "It was sealed by the Mount team Friday at 3:48 p.m. I signed off on the exhibit sheet. Security logs show no unlocks, and no alarms or sensor triggers overnight." "Then how do you explain this?" I asked, pulling the spoon from my coat. Her expression didn't change, but her mouth tightened slightly. "I don't," I asked Claire. The same question. "You don't think she tampered with it herself?" Kristen hesitated. Claire's thorough, maybe overly so. She'd never compromise an object in her care. That's not a no. She was under pressure. This was her first solo exhibit, was. Kristen paused. Her supervisor suspended her this morning, said she compromised the integrity of the collection by removing the altered spoon without authorization. And you let her? She didn't exactly wait for permission. She showed up before we opened, used her badge to access the floor and took it. Security caught it on camera after the fact, which I had to admit sounded a lot like the Claire Bennington we'd met that morning. Calm on the outside, holding back a flood. Mind if I talk to security? They're expecting you. She pointed down the hallway. Office suite? Past the elevators. Ask for Captain Niels Jernigan. Jernigan turned out to be 6'2" of ex-cop with a fondness for suspenders and a mug of coffee the size of a soup bowl. He showed me the footage without preamble. Friday afternoon. Claire. Sealing the cabinet, gloved hands efficient. Monday morning. Claire back again, alone, unlocking the cabinet and removing the spoon in one motion like she'd rehearsed it. No sign of anyone else? I asked. Nope, he said. No phantom visitors, no camera glitches, no locked room. Mysteries. We log every entry and exit from this gallery. This floor's got better coverage than a Vegas poker room. But somehow the spoon got bent. You tell me, Jernigan said, unless the silverware's haunted. That was the second time someone had hinted at the supernatural, which, in my line of work, usually meant one thing. Someone wanted you looking in the wrong direction. On my way back through the gallery, I paused. The janitor was gone, so was the guy with the ladder. The exhibit case sat there, half empty and innocent. But the space the spoon had occupied seemed to glow with unasked questions. I took the subway downtown and walked the remaining blocks to the address Wolfe had jotted down on a scrap of yellow paper. It was a brownstone, like ours, but 3 shades, grayer and 2 stories taller. A brass plaque beside the door read, Dr. Eloise Bennington, Ph.D., Art Historian Emerita. The apartment above it was hers, had been hers. The super met me at the door. You a cop? He asked. Private investigator, I said, looking into her death. He squinted. Thought that was ruled an accident. Just tying up some questions. He shrugged and led me up. She was quiet. Kept to herself. Real polite. Sad thing, what happened? The stairwell creaked under our feet as we ascended. According to the report Wolfe had pulled, Dr. Bennington had slipped down these stairs 3 weeks ago and broken her neck. No sign of foul play, no suspicious marks, but also no witnesses. Her place hadn't been rented out yet. The door opened, onto a narrow entryway and a small parlor lined with shelves. Books on European metalwork, design theory, silver. Dozens of photos in frames. A younger Claire with her mother, a man I guessed was Claire's father, long gone by the look of the photos. On the coffee table was a folder with notations in tidy cursive. I flipped through it. It was a donor list. Private contributors to the Met's acquisitions fund over the past decade. Some familiar names, Big Fish, Old Money. Others, less so. One name had been circled twice in red ink, Felix Ransom. That was a name I knew. Real estate development. Philanthropy on Tuesdays, tax evasion on Wednesdays. He'd funded half a wing at the Met 5 years ago and spent the rest of the decade making sure everyone knew it. I took the folder and snapped a few photos of the rest of the apartment. Nothing obvious, nothing broken, except maybe the quiet itself. There was something uneasy in the air, like the silence had been rehearsed too well. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the play-by-play, while he polished off a dish of poached eggs and sourdough toast. He didn't interrupt, but his lips twitched. When I mentioned the name Felix Ransom, when I finished, he tapped the rim of his coffee cup twice. She believes the spoon pointed north, he said. Yeah, Claire Bennington is not given to metaphor, and she is not mad. Therefore, we assume the object was indeed altered to convey direction. Okay. Her mother, shortly before her death, adds a single name to a folder tracking institutional donors. That name, Felix Ransom. A man with considerable influence and a known tendency toward vanity. You think Ransom bent the spoon? No. But I think he had reason to fear it being displayed. I frowned. You mean it's not just a spoon? Wolfe looked at me as if I had asked whether fire was hot. Contact Saul. Tell him to find everything he can on Felix Ransom's connections to the Met, especially any acquisitions overseen by Eloise Bennington, and ask him to verify the circumstances of her fall. I want names, witnesses, details. I stood. What about Claire? She is to remain uncontacted until further notice. We must determine whether she is a whistleblower or a scapegoat. And the spoon? Wolfe glanced at it, now resting on the corner of his desk like a sleeping cat. Keep it visible. If it provokes further trespass, that will tell us something. I nodded and turned for the door. Oh, and Archie, yeah? Before you sleep tonight, consider this. If you wish to signal someone from beyond the grave, would you use a telephone, a note, or a dining utensil? I didn't answer, because with Wolfe the punchline was usually a clue. The next morning started with coffee, clippings, and a sharp knock at the front door. I was halfway through the Times crossword when Fritz brought in the visitor's card on a small silver tray, the kind Wolfe insisted on using even when the visitor didn't merit the silver. Felix Ransom, I said aloud, reading it. Wolfe didn't even raise an eyebrow. Show him in. Now, I'd seen a few versions of Felix Ransom, charity galas, boardrooms, back-page scandals, but this wasn't one of those days when he was being charming. He came in brisk and cold, like a banker with a bad audit, tall, hair like brushed steel, a suit that cost more than a used car and didn't apologize for it. He nodded to me like I was the bellhop and gave Wolfe a thin-lipped smile. Mr. Wolfe, a pleasure. Not yet, Wolfe said. Sit, he did, with the wary grace of a man who doesn't like rooms he doesn't control. His fingers twitched on the armrest like he was resisting the urge to tap out a memo. I understand, Ransom began, that you've taken an interest in a certain object from the Metropolitan Museum. I have taken no interest in the object, Wolfe said. I have taken a client. She is connected to the object, therefore it has been considered. Ransom's eyes flicked to the spoon on the corner of the desk. He didn't touch it, but his jaw tightened. I'm here to ask politely that you refrain from pursuing that interest further. Wolfe leaned back slightly. A peculiar request. I'm not threatening you. Good, Wolfe said. I dislike threats. They make me curious. There was a pause. I could almost see the gears turning in Ransom's head, running through the playbook. Charm, pressure, financial incentive. He chose a mix. Eloise Bennington was an exceptional woman. We worked together for years. Her legacy should be left untarnished. Her daughter, Claire, is unwell. She's been erratic since the funeral. There's no mystery here. The spoon is a meaningless distraction. Yet you are here to silence discussion of it, Wolfe said, which lends it meaning. Only because it's being used to stir up gossip, Ransom replied. And gossip at the Met spreads like mold. Wolfe closed his eyes. You are not here out of concern for Miss Bennington's health. You are here because you believe I have access to something that threatens you. Ransom's smile was thin. Let me be frank. If something unseemly from the museum's past were to surface, something misfiled, misunderstood, or misrepresented, it would affect more than one person's reputation. That kind of exposure helps no one. Not Claire, not me, certainly not the museum. You assume, Wolfe said, that I am invested in helping the museum. I assume, Ransom said, standing, that you're a man who understands value and limits. He didn't wait for a dismissal. He walked out the way he came, every step measured. I waited until the door clicked shut before turning to Wolfe. You think he did it? It remains undefined, Wolfe said. But yes, I think he is involved. He's worried about something Eloise knew. Wolfe nodded once, and worried that Claire is close to discovering it. The phone rang before I could ask what the next move was. I picked it up. Archie, Saul. His voice was low, even by Saul standards. I've got something. I grabbed a pen. Talk. Felix Ransom's real estate firm donated a property to the Met 6 years ago, a warehouse in Red Hook, supposed to be a tax write-off and storage for overflow collections, but it never showed up on the museum's official inventory. No signage, no photos, no staff assigned. Secret warehouse full of art? More like full of records. I tailed a guy from Ransom's office there last night. He didn't go in, but he stood outside for 15 minutes making calls. Nervous, kept checking the street. You go in? Not yet. Thought I'd check with the boss. I covered the mouthpiece. Saul found a warehouse Ransom donated to the museum. Off books. Looks like record storage. He's watching it now. Wolfe opened his eyes. Tell him to enter discreetly, document everything. I relayed the order. I'll report back, Saul said and hung up. By the time Fritz called us to lunch, lamb chops, mint sauce, baked fennel. I had paced a trench into the carpet. Wolfe, on the other hand, chewed with the patience of a man dissecting a theory in his mind with every bite. After lunch, Saul called again. It's a mess in there, he said. Dust, boxes, too. Filing cabinets half finished. One of them's locked, but I found something. Yeah? A ledger. Names, numbers. Some crossed out, others underlined. The dates match acquisition years from Eloise Bennington's tenure. Anything on Ransom? There's a code, FRJ 7217, next to 5 different entries, cross-referenced. With donor plaques at the museum, Ransom's involved in all 5. Could be funding, could be forgery, and could be both. I hung up and repeated it all for Wolfe, who was now facing the spoon like it was offering testimony. He didn't say anything for a long moment. 5 entries, he murmured, and only now does someone move to alter the record. Eloise must have uncovered something. Perhaps she was compiling evidence. The folder Archie found circled names, donor connections. She was building a map. Which means Claire might have more. Or worse, Wolfe said, she might not realize what she has. And others might assume she does. That got me moving. You want me to bring her in? No, Wolfe said, we bring them all in. I looked at him. You're calling the suspects already? I am assembling a constellation, he said. Ransom is only one star. There are others. Kristen Lynn, the supervisor who suspended Claire, and the registrar who co-signed the exhibit's final layout. I want them all here tomorrow at 11. You're going to do the full routine. Wolfe gave the faintest smile. If they bent the spoon to point north, then let us oblige them by leading them directly into the compass's path. I nodded. And Claire, Wolfe's voice softened. She is already in the middle of this. We shall see whether she is the storm or its eye. I headed to make the calls. Wolfe turned back to the spoon. Outside the windows, Manhattan began its slow descent into evening, shadows climbing the walls. Inside, the brownstone held its breath. The compass had been laid. By 10:30, the next morning, the brownstone was dressed for confrontation. Wolfe had called for the chairs to be rearranged in that neat little half-circle of doom that made guests feel less like they were visiting a consulting detective and more like they were about to confess to arson in a parlor game. I'd taken the liberty of polishing the spoon and setting it on the edge of Wolfe's desk, angled just slightly north, purely symbolic, but Wolfe liked props when they served a purpose. And this one, judging by the number of people it had, already ruffled, had purpose to spare. The first to arrive was Kristen Lynn, crisp as ever in a slate-grey suit and a ponytail tight enough to lift eyebrows. She looked around the office like she was memorizing exits. I wasn't told why I was being asked here, she said. taking the seat farthest from Wolfe. "That's correct," I replied. "We figured your curiosity would outrun your caution." She gave me a look that belonged in a scalpel catalogue and said nothing else. Next came Gregory Mott, the supervising curator who'd suspended Claire. He was thin, pale, and wore a tie that looked like it had come with an instruction manual he hadn't read. He smiled as if his career depended on it, which it probably did. Then the registrar, Lucy Trammell, a middle-aged woman with horn-rimmed glasses, a faint tremor in her left hand, and a canvas messenger bag hugged close like a security blanket. She looked nervous, but not scared. That's a fine line and usually tells you something. Last Claire Bennington herself, unannounced but not unexpected. I opened the door to her just as Wolfe finished adjusting the angle of his chair. She wore no makeup, had a folder under one arm, and didn't bother sitting until Wolfe inclined his head once in acknowledgement. "I told you not to contact her," Wolfe said, not unkindly. "You didn't," I replied. She found her own way in. She sat. "I want to hear it all, whatever this is." Wolfe took a moment, glanced at each face in turn. "Miss Bennington," he said, "if you would kindly remain silent for the moment. I believe your presence may clarify more than your speech." Claire nodded tightly. Wolfe turned to the others. "You are all here because of a spoon." The silence was immediate and thick. Wolfe gestured lightly toward it. Bent, moved, planted, a silver utensil altered to convey direction. This is not, as it appears, a matter of museum vandalism. It is a signal made by someone with intent, access, and a very specific audience. Kristen shifted slightly in her chair. "And you believe that audience is Claire?" "I do not believe it. Miss Bennington's reaction to the spoon, emotional, instinctive, precise, suggests prior knowledge, not of the act but of its message. And messages have senders." Mott cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe, if I may, we've already spoken to legal about Claire's actions. Removing an exhibit item—" Wolfe raised a hand. Mott stopped as if he'd been yanked by a string. "You are here," Wolfe said evenly, "to listen, not litigate." Mott went red and stayed quiet. "The spoon," Wolfe continued, "was part of a minor exhibit designed and implemented by Miss Bennington. The case was sealed and logged. The object, previously unlisted, was added from a private donor's archive. That donor was Dr. Eloise Bennington." Lucy Trammell finally spoke. "Eloise submitted that acquisition 10 years ago, a box of decorative miscellany from the Holloway estate. We catalogued it in 2014. And you," Wolfe said, "were responsible for logging the item in question." Lucy nodded slowly. "Yes, it was insignificant. No major provenance, no appraisals attached. But not valueless," Wolfe said, "just inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" Kristen asked. Wolfe didn't answer her directly. "Miss Trammell," he said, "the original inventory for that Holloway box. Do you still have it?" She hesitated. I brought the folder." She pulled it from her bag and offered it across the room. Archie intercepted and handed it to Wolfe. Wolfe opened it, paged silently, then turned it to face us. "Item 17. Sterling silver spoon, floral pattern, worn stem." Notably, no mention of a bend. Kristen frowned. "Of course not. It wasn't bent when it was logged." "Correct," Wolfe said. "Which is why its present form is so interesting." Claire's voice soft and precise. "Someone bent it recently, not years ago." "Exactly," Wolfe said. He turned to Mott. "You suspended Miss Bennington. Why?" Mott sat up straighter. "Because she removed an item from a display without authorization. And she made vague, troubling implications about a connection between that object and her mother's death." "Why troubling?" Because there was no basis for it. The death was ruled accidental. She's grieving." Wolfe let out a breath. "You are correct in one regard. Miss Bennington is grieving, but grief does not invent a physical alteration in a sealed case." He turned back to Claire. "You believe your mother left a message, that this spoon was ghee. Meant for you." Claire didn't flinch. "I do. She was trying to tell me something about what she found." "And what did she find?" Claire opened the folder she had brought and passed it to me. Inside were photocopied emails, donor spreadsheets, and a series of notes in her mother's handwriting. One name kept appearing: Felix Ransom. Wolfe glanced at it. Ransom donated properties, made acquisitions, and 5 of those items were listed under false donor names, conduits, intermediaries. Your mother had started matching the inventory to tax forms, Claire nodded. She was planning to report it. I think someone knew. I think she was warned or silenced. Kristen spoke up sharply. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes," Wolfe said, "and not one made lightly." Lucy Trammell looked ill. Wolfe leaned forward. "Miss Trammell, who else had keys to—" "The Holloway archive?" She blinked. Only me and Eloise. And who last accessed it?" "I did," she whispered. "Last month I was told to remove 2 items for reappraisal. It was Mr. Ransom's request." "And did Eloise Bennington know?" "She found out," Lucy said. "She was furious. She said the integrity of the archive was at risk," which it was, Wolfe said. "Not because of a spoon, but because of a pattern of manipulation, of laundering provenance through museum hands, of attaching prestige to items with muddy pasts. And your mother found it," he let that sink in. "Someone bent that spoon to point north, not as a joke, but as a warning. Or a trigger, to force Claire to see what was hidden. It worked." He turned to me. "Archie, inform Saul. I want confirmation of Ransom's shell donors within the hour, and notify the police. Miss Trammell's admission changes the shape of Eloise Bennington's death." Lucy began to cry, quiet and shaking. Claire reached for her instinctively. Wolfe sat back. "I do not know yet," he said, "who killed Dr. Bennington, but I now know why." The room was silent. "And," Wolfe added, "I know who altered the spoon." All heads turned to him, but Wolfe, as usual, said nothing more. Not yet. The silence after Wolfe's last line hung there, heavy and pressing. You could practically feel everyone trying to do the math in their heads, who had touched what, when, and how that led to a bent spoon sitting like a loaded gun on the edge of Wolfe's desk. Kristen Lynn's jaw clenched just enough to register in the corner of my eye. Mott started fiddling with his tie again. Lucy Trammell kept her eyes fixed. On her lap, hands clasped white-knuckled around the edges of her messenger bag. Claire, bless her, didn't say a word. She just looked at Wolfe like she already knew what was coming and had decided to brace for it. "You know who bent the spoon?" Kristen finally asked. "Then say it." Wolfe didn't. Not yet. Instead, he looked at me. "Archie, retrieve the surveillance footage from the Met security archives, specifically the day after Miss Bennington's mother passed. Find the segment between 8 and 10 a.m. I gave him a look. "I can get it, but I'll have to twist some arms." "You may use Saul," Wolfe said, "and twist carefully. The right bend, after all, changes everything." That was his idea of a joke. I stepped into the hall and dialed Saul. His voice came through low and fast. "Already working on it. The footage is time-stamped, but the internal archive's a mess. There's a gap. 2 files pulled for review that were never returned. Any chance someone inside the museum's been sanitizing the logs? Wouldn't be the first time, but whoever did it wasn't surgical, left traces. I'll have a copy to you within the hour." "Good. Wolfe's got them lined up in here like ducks and is ready to fire. Make it quick." When I came back in, the arrangement hadn't changed. Wolfe hadn't moved more than a breath, and no one had dared shift under his gaze. He was just waiting. He liked to let them sit long enough to make their own confessions. "I should like to make a proposition," Wolfe said at last. "Let us presume, purely for speculation, that the spoon was bent not as sabotage but as a signal. Not for the public, not for the press, but for one person, Claire Bennington. No one argued. He continued. This act required access to the sealed cabinet. We know Miss Bennington did not tamper with it prior to its placement. She was the one who recognized the alteration and removed the spoon in alarm. Therefore, we eliminate her as a candidate. Mott coughed. If this is meant to be a process of elimination, it is, Wolfe said flatly, and it will eliminate you in due course, Mr. Mott. Kindly contain yourself. Mott fell quiet, visibly smarting. Wolfe turned to Kristen. You, Miss Lynn, handled the case post-sealing. You oversaw registrar confirmations. Did you at any time reopen the display? No, she said. There was no reason to. The censors would have logged it. But the logs, as we now know, were incomplete. Selectively so. Kristen's lips pressed together. That wasn't me. I agree, Wolfe said. It was not. He pivoted. Miss Trammell. Lucy flinched as if her name had been a slap. You had keys to the Holloway archive. You accessed it under Ransom's directive. You were the last person to handle the original inventory. And most critically, you were the only person left who might have suspected what Eloise Bennington was compiling. No, she whispered. Wolfe raised a hand. You knew she was suspicious. You knew she had started connecting names and dates. You didn't know how far she'd gotten, but you feared what might happen if Claire picked up the trail. So you gave her a nudge. He turned to the spoon. You bent it, deliberately. You opened the case before hours, on the Monday following Eloise Bennington's funeral, using your registrar credentials, and you repositioned the spoon. Not as damage, as a clue. Lucy Trammell's mouth opened, but no sound came. Kristen leaned forward slightly, watching her like a cat watching a spider trying to play dead. You didn't kill Eloise, Wolfe said, voice calm. You respected her. Feared her, perhaps. But you didn't silence her. You were too afraid of what she knew and too ashamed to bury it. So instead, you left a trail. A single act of mischief to spur Claire's attention, and ours. Lucy finally spoke. She deserved better, she said softly. She tried to do the right thing, but no one wanted to hear it. The board, Ransom, Mott, they just wanted the funding, prestige, donor dinners, and the pieces. Some of them were real, yes, but the records were crooked. Money was moved in and out under layers of donors and fake valuations. And you remained silent, Wolfe said. I wanted to go to the press, she said. I thought maybe Eloise would. But then she died and no one cared. So I bent the spoon. I knew Claire would notice it. I knew it would look wrong. And if she asked questions, someone would have to listen. And if someone else noticed? Wolfe asked. If Ransom had realized what you were doing? Lucy looked down. Then maybe he'd be more careful, Wolfe grunted. Naive. Lucy flinched. Kristen exhaled slowly. So that's it then. The whole house of cards was held up by Ransom's ghost donors. Wolfe nodded once. And now the cards are falling. The phone rang. I picked it up. Saul? Got it. Full footage. Trammell entered the gallery at 7:52 a.m., Monday. Used her badge. Disabled the sensors for 5 minutes, then re-engaged them. Clear as day. Perfect. Wolfe's ready. I hung up and gave Wolfe the nod. He turned to Claire. Miss Bennington, you have your mother's files. You now have confirmation of what she uncovered. The police will take interest. Claire looked across the room at Lucy, then down at the spoon. I won't bury it, she said. No, Wolfe agreed. Nor should you. He looked at Mott. Your role in this may yet be clarified, but I doubt your position will survive the week. Mott started to protest, thought better of it, and shut his mouth. Kristen stood. I'll have our legal team prepare statements, and the museum's board will need to be briefed. You realize this will be very, very messy. Wolfe nodded. Yes, but then, integrity often is. As they filed out, Lucy lingered behind. I didn't know what else to do, she said, voice barely audible. You did the only thing you could, Wolfe said. You pointed north. When she was gone, Wolfe let out a long breath and finally leaned back into the sanctuary of silence. I poured him a fresh beer from the kitchen and set it down. Another one solved by cutlery, I said. He sipped. The humble utensil is often underestimated, I smirked. So what now? Now, he said, and we return to order. Fritz will serve lunch in 7 minutes. The world may tilt, but not here. The spoon still sat on the desk, quiet, unbending. Now, whatever it had to say, it had said it well. The next 2 days passed in a kind of calm that made me suspicious. Wolfe returned to his orchids. I returned to polishing the office doorknobs, and Fritz resumed preparing meals with the contented rhythm of a man whose dining room no longer felt like a crime scene. Even the spoon, now relocated to a locked drawer in Wolfe's desk, seemed to have given up its final ounce of drama. But I've known Wolfe long enough to recognize when the piece is just a waiting room. Claire Bennington stopped by the morning after the gathering. She didn't bring flowers or thanks or even a question. She brought a newspaper folded under one arm and the kind of look that means someone's just set fire to the curtains without touching a match. Page 4, she said, as I took her coat. It was the Herald, not our usual read, but useful, for sniffing around museum donors and editorially approved scandals. I opened it. The headline read, Met under review for acquisition fraud. Donor records questioned after curator's death. Below it was a small photo of Eloise Bennington and a key caption I wouldn't have picked for my worst enemy. Whistleblower? Claire sat without waiting to be invited, crossing one leg over the other with a kind of quiet fury. Someone leaked the investigation. That file you gave the police, Lucy's statement, the ledger Saul found, my mother's notes, it's all in there. Half redacted, of course, but the right people will recognize it. Wolfe, who had been pretending to ignore us while trimming a speckled phalaenopsis, gave a slow exhale and turned in his chair. You disapprove. I don't know what to think, Claire said. It's not just about my mother anymore. This turns her work into a circus. The museum is scrambling to plug holes in the board. Ransom's name is getting whitewashed faster than I can blink, and Lucy's vanished. No calls, no email, nothing. Expected, Wolfe said. She is no longer useful to those who manipulated her. She may be a threat. That's what I'm worried about. He eyed her. Then you are more perceptive than your tone suggests. Sit still, Miss Bennington. We are not yet done. She blinked. There's more? Of course, Wolfe said. We are only now approaching the fulcrum. That was Wolfe, for we've lifted the rock, but something's still moving underneath it. He looked at me. Archie, fetch the copy of the donor archive Saul extracted from the warehouse. Page 11. Item code FRJ7217B. I brought it over. Wolfe slid a magnifying glass across the page and read silently. Then he looked at Claire. Did your mother ever mention a piece called Le Jardin d'Ivre? Claire frowned. That's not a name I recognize. An iron and glass conservatory panel, Wolfe said. Mid-19th century. Decorative, but not especially rare. Catalogued as anonymous French artisan. Donated under the FRJ series. That item was transferred via the Holloway estate to the museum. It's currently in storage. Your mother had flagged it with an asterisk. She leaned forward. So, Wolfe said. The panel contains a faint signature. Someone etched a mark into the scrollwork. Barely visible unless under ultraviolet light. It's not French, it's Flemish, and the signature belongs to a known forger, Matteo de Klerk. Claire's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. He's in the forgery database. Wolfe nodded. Convicted twice. expelled from 3 European guilds. His work was believed to have been smuggled into North American collections through laundering networks, museums with inattentive registrars, eager donors, or both. I added, meaning that whole warehouse probably has more plants than the orchid room. Claire's voice was barely audible. And my mother found this? She did, Wolfe said. She traced the donor code. That panel was her keystone. Everything unraveled from there. There was a moment when no one spoke. Then Claire said slowly, "You think Ransom knew?" "I think," Wolfe replied. "He built the entire facade with that knowledge. The signature was faint, yes, but the file indicates it was noted during an initial inspection, and then erased." Her voice tightened. "So she knew, and they knew she knew." I said, "You're thinking this makes her death—" "What? Not an accident?" Claire didn't answer, but Wolfe did. "That is precisely the question we must now resolve." I was about to make a call when the doorbell rang. Fritz answered and Saul Panzer walked in. No tie, coat unbuttoned, and a look on his face like someone had shoved an unsolved puzzle in his pocket, and it had started leaking. "I've got something," he said, handing Wolfe a flash drive. Wolfe didn't bother with ceremony. I plugged it into the office laptop and pulled up the files. Surveillance footage. Red Hook Warehouse, timestamped 2 nights ago. Saul had followed Lucy Trammell there, alone, just after midnight. "Look at the light angle," Saul said. She left the overhead off, used a small desk lamp. She was searching the back shelves, but she didn't touch the main file cabinet. She took one envelope from a side drawer. Slim, manila, sealed. Claire whispered. She took something. She hadn't turned over before. "Likely," Wolfe said. "And then?" "Then she left." But she wasn't alone for long. Saul clicked to the next file. A different angle. A man in a ball cap and windbreaker waiting just outside the loading dock entrance. Facial recognition wouldn't be needed. Felix Ransom had never been good at disguises. He followed Lucy at a distance, left frame, nothing after that. "That was 40 hours ago," Saul said. "Lucy hasn't been seen since." Claire stood. "You have to tell the police." "I will," Wolfe said. "But we must. First ensure the envelope still exists. Its contents may yet be recoverable." I stood too. "You want me to find Lucy?" "No," Wolfe said. "I want you to find the envelope." Claire said, "But if she's in danger—" "She may already be beyond reach," Wolfe replied, quietly. "But what she carried may not be. Archie, the envelope, the faster, the better." I grabbed my coat, nodded at Claire, and paused by the desk just long enough to glance at the locked drawer. The spoon was still there, still pointing north, still telling us where to look, and I was headed that way. It took me just under 25 minutes to reach Lucy Trammell's apartment building on the Upper West Side. I'd been there once before, briefly, when I was chasing down a donor's grandson who'd accidentally walked out of a Met fundraiser with an Etruscan fibula in his coat pocket. The building hadn't changed, still had the kind of brass fixtures that hadn't seen polish since the Clinton administration, and a doorman who looked like he knew how to keep secrets and when not to ask questions. I showed him my card. "She hasn't been in or out in 2 days, he said with a glance over his shoulder. "Mail's piling up. You a cop?" "Private," I said. "We're worried she might have been followed. She's not answering calls." He pursed his lips, weighing risk and responsibility. Then he handed me the spare key from behind the desk. 15 minutes. Don't mess with anything you don't have to." I tipped my hat and took the elevator to 5B. The apartment was clean, sparse. A few framed posters from old exhibitions, a teapot still warm on the counter, and a half-finished Sudoku on the coffee table. No sign of a struggle, no overturned chairs. But there was a palpable tension in the air, like the kind of quiet you get when a room is waiting for someone to come back and explain something. I went through drawers, politely but quickly. No sign of the envelope, no letters, nothing new. Then I noticed something odd on her desk. A library book, Private Collections and Public Trust, with a return slip tucked just a bit too neatly inside. The due date was tomorrow, and Lucy didn't strike me as the type to risk a fine. I flipped it open. Page 217 was dog-eared. Taped just behind the flap of the dust jacket was a key. Small, brass, and etched with the initials NRC. I knew those letters. New Rochelle Conservancy. A private archive tied to historic preservation, mostly defunct these days except for estate files and architectural registries. If Lucy had stashed something, it wasn't here. It was off the grid. I made one call on the way back down, then another once I hit the street and confirmed the address. The Conservancy was in a nondescript building off Cedar and 5th, 30 minutes north by car. By the time I pulled up, Saul was already there. They still have her listed as a credentialed researcher, he said, nodding to the receptionist, who was more interested in her romance novel than in us. Theo thinks she used this as a fallback. If she was trying to keep something hidden from Ransom, this is where I'd go, I said. No cameras, no museum oversight. We signed in under Lucy's name and were led to a quiet room in the back. Concrete floors, old pine cabinets, the smell of paper and varnish. I used the key. Inside the drawer was one manila envelope exactly like Saul had seen on the footage. Her name was written in pencil on the front. I opened it slowly. Inside, 2 typed pages, a thumb drive, and a single photograph. The photo showed Felix Ransom with a younger man, early 20s, sharp eyes, blurred background. Behind them, on a wooden table, lay a silver spoon, identical to the one now resting in Wolfe's drawer. But this one wasn't bent. It was straight, pristine, polished. On the back of the photo was a date, June 14th, 2015. Saul leaned in. That the same spoon? I nodded. Or its twin. The pages were cleaner than I expected. A statement, names, dates, matching Ransom's. Donation codes with forgeries known to European black market trackers. Eloise Bennington had clearly been planning a full report. This was her master file. She gave it to Lucy, I said aloud, told her to hide it in case anything happened. And now Lucy's gone. I slid the thumb drive into Saul's laptop. More files. Copies of donor correspondence, metadata. From private registries, one recording, voice only, Eloise speaking softly, methodically. If anything happens to me, she said, Claire should know where it started. Tell her it was the panel in storage. She'll understand they can't erase all of it. Saul met my eyes. You want to call Wolfe? Yeah, but not from here. We checked out and took the long way back, circling through side streets in case anyone had noticed our arrival. Wolfe was waiting in the office with his usual calm, only betraying a flicker of tension when I handed him the photo. He examined it in silence. Ransom's companion? No ID yet, I said, but I'll run it through Saul's contact. At the Art Crimes Division. Wolfe nodded and took the printout of the report next. Claire was already seated, holding a cup of Fritz's coffee in both hands like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. She read the top page. Her eyes widened. She wrote this, she whispered. I know that phrasing. That's hers. Wolfe didn't interrupt. When she was done, she looked up. So now what? Now, Wolfe said. We use it. He instructed me to call Inspector Kramer. You will inform him of the full file, names, evidence, locations, and request protective detail for Miss Bennington and Miss Trammell if she is located. Claire sat straighter. You think she's still alive? I think, Wolfe said, Ransom will want her to be, for now. She has the potential to damage his influence beyond repair, but only if her voice is allowed to carry. He'll want to keep her quiet until he can discredit or control her. Claire gave a slow nod. And this? She pointed at the spoon in the drawer. Wolfe lifted it gently, held it between his thumb and forefinger like it was a surgical instrument. This. Miss Bennington is no longer a mystery. It is a symbol. Bent deliberately, yes, but now we know where it pointed. He returned it to the drawer, to truth, and to those with the will to follow it. I made the call to Kramer, who listened in tight silence and said he'd be there within the hour. He didn't sound pleased, but he never did when Wolfe handed him a case fully baked, especially when the crumbs pointed to men with museum wings in their name. As I hung up, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "Archie," he said. "Yes, sir?" "Set the table. Fritz will be serving braised duck tonight. Let us restore some order before the world resumes its clamor." Claire almost smiled. Outside, the city was beginning to darken. The lights flickered on, one window at a time, like little sparks in a larger web. And in the stillness of the brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary held steady, unchanged, undisturbed, except for the faint metallic glint of the spoon that had pointed us north and would never point back again. Inspector Kramer arrived at Wolfe's brownstone an hour later, smelling of cigar smoke and irritation. He didn't sit right away. He stood in front of Wolfe's desk with his hat in one hand and his jaw set like he'd bitten down on a screw. "I ought to arrest you for obstruction," he said. Sitting on a file like this for 48 hours, Wolfe didn't look up from the typed summary he'd prepared. "Nonsense. You received it precisely when it was fit to be acted upon." I handed Kramer the envelope with the thumb drive, the photograph, and a copy of Eloise Bennington's recorded statement. This was retrieved today from a secondary archive, hidden under Lucy Trammell's name. She's missing. "Which you've made clear," Kramer grunted. "Ransom?" "We suspect he was the last person to see her," Wolfe said. "Saul Panzer followed him leaving the Red Hook facility. He was tailing Miss Trammell." Kramer shot me a look. "Panzer's your bloodhound. Why didn't he intervene?" "He didn't know the stakes until the envelope was opened," I said. "And by then she was gone. You should have told me sooner." "You'd have demanded the evidence first," Wolfe said, "and likely confiscated the documents before Claire Bennington had the chance to verify their authenticity." I required her insight. Kramer's nostrils flared, but he didn't argue the point. He flipped through the report again. "This is bad," he muttered. "This is real bad. Declerc's signature, provenance forgeries, donor laundering. It's not just ransom. If even half these names pan out, we've got a ring that stretches into the boardrooms." Wolfe's eyes didn't waver. "The department will move cautiously." "But move it must." Kramer nodded, slow and reluctant. "We'll start with the Holloway files, then the Red Hook site. I want Claire Bennington under watch. I'll post a man at her door until we get confirmation on Trammell's location." "Thank you," Wolfe said. Claire, sitting quietly in the corner, finally stood. "What happens to ransom?" Kramer adjusted his coat. "If we find Lucy alive and she confirms what you've got here, he's finished. Even without a body, this is enough to ruin him. But I need more than motive. I need the pressure point." He looked at Wolfe. "Can you give me that?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He reached into the drawer and removed the spoon again, as if drawing a sword. "This was the pressure point," he said. "This object, bent not in anger but as a final act of conscience, forced Miss Bennington to see the pattern, and the pattern always leads to the hand that drew it." Kramer grunted. "Poetic, but not probable cause." Wolfe gave him a faint smile. "That is your burden. Mine was simply to reveal it." When Kramer left, he took the envelope, the drive, and our final piece of leverage. The air in the office felt thinner after that, as if we'd opened a valve on the whole affair and let it drain out into the city where it belonged. Claire stayed a little longer. Fritz brought her tea and some of his honey cakes, and she sat in the dining room, quiet, reading her mother's handwriting over and over. She didn't cry, but I could see something in her face loosen, like she'd been holding her breath for a year and was only just starting to exhale. That night, Wolfe did not request a post-prandial beer. He stayed in his chair after dinner, hands steepled, eyes closed. I took my own coffee into the front room and let the silence settle. At around 10, the phone rang. Wolfe answered it himself. He listened for 30 seconds, then said, "Yes," and hung up. "Lucy Trammell's been found," he said. I sat up. Alive? Alive. In a motel in Poughkeepsie, disoriented but unharmed, likely drugged. Someone took her bag, but not her person. She managed to call the local precinct once she woke up. I got to my feet. So Ransom tried to scare her quiet, or keep her from confirming what we now know, Wolfe said. I grabbed my coat. "You want me to go up there?" "No," Wolfe said. "Kramer has already dispatched a team. Lucy will be brought back and protected. And Ransom," Wolfe tapped the spoon lightly against the edge of his desk, "he will run out of ground. He always planned to hide behind others, foundations, intermediaries, his wealth. But when the curtain is lifted, men like him are always found standing alone." I sat again, slowly. Claire emerged a few minutes later and said, "I'm going to the Met tomorrow. First thing." "To resign?" I asked. She shook her head. "To stay. My mother worked there for 30 years. I'm not letting them erase her for convenience. I'm going to finish what she started." Wolfe looked at her and for once didn't grunt. When she left, the brownstone grew quiet again. Later, after I'd locked up and turned out the lights, I found Wolfe still in the office, gazing at the spoon in the desk lamp's glow. I said, "If you ever leave me a clue, don't use silverware." "I wouldn't," he murmured. "You're far too literal." I turned to go. Behind me he said one more thing, soft but certain. "It is not always violence that wounds deepest. Sometimes it is the act of pretending nothing is broken." And with that, the spoon was returned to the drawer, the lock clicked shut, and the brownstone at last returned to stillness. The next morning began the way Wolfe preferred. No visitors, no phone calls, and no assaults on the sanctity of breakfast. Fritz served an omelette with Gruyere and chives, and Wolfe consumed it with the slow, deliberate pace of a man feeding both body and theory. I ate mine quickly, half listening to the radio for updates Kramer wasn't likely to give us by phone. But there was nothing yet, not on Ransom, not on Lucy, not on the museum. Wolfe didn't speak until Fritz had cleared the plates and retreated into the kitchen. "I believe we are approaching the denouement," he said, dabbing his lips with his napkin. "You're confident Kramer will act?" "No," Wolfe said, "but he has no alternative. The evidence is now public. Miss Trammell's recovery will preclude any effort to bury it. And Ransom's pattern of influence is cracking. Even men who build their empires on gifts and gala tables must answer to the ledger eventually." It wasn't exactly celebratory, but for Wolfe it was as close to an expression of satisfaction as we'd get. I didn't disagree. Still, something gnawed at me. "There's one thing that's been bothering me," I said. Wolfe glanced at me. "Only one?" "Why the spoon?" He gave a slight shrug, almost imperceptible. "You think it's too theatrical?" "I think it's almost poetic, too subtle. Trammell could have written a letter, sent a file. Why bend a piece of silver and stage it like some kind of riddled compass?" Wolfe didn't answer right away. He looked toward the desk drawer, the one where the spoon now rested like a memorial plaque. "Because," he said finally, "it had to be quiet. There are messages you cannot send with ink, and Lucy Trammell was not prepared to be a whistleblower. She was a librarian, a curator. Her life was about placing things in order, not tearing down institutions. So she used the tools she had, an object no one else would notice, arranged to speak only to the one person who would." "She pointed north," I murmured, more to myself than him. "Indeed, not just to truth, to loyalty, to legacy." He stood, slowly, carefully, as if shedding a weight, and walked to his orchid room without another word. An hour later, The phone rang. "Archie Goodwin," I answered. "This is Kramer." His voice was low and short, and I knew immediately something had cracked. "They've picked up Ransom?" "No," Kramer said. "He disappeared. Passport flagged yesterday afternoon. Private jet never left the ground, but the tail number was altered. We think he left under someone else's clearance. He's gone." I stood straighter. "You let him slip?" We had eyes on his residence. He never returned home. Whoever helped him had money and reach. He's not coming back. Hell. That's not the worst of it. Tell me, Kramer hesitated. He left a message behind for Claire Bennington. A pause. A message. He sent a package to her apartment. We intercepted it before she opened it. Plain envelope. No note. Just a single photo. My stomach tightened. What kind of photo? It's of her mother. That's not unusual. She's alive in it. From before she died. But it's a new print. Modern paper. And it's been marked. Marked. How? Red ink circled across her throat like a slash. The silence on the line stretched. Kramer said, "It's intimidation. A warning. Ransom wanted her to know he could still get to her. Even from wherever he's hiding." I rubbed my temple. "So he's out of reach, but still playing." "Yes," Kramer said, "and he has allies, money, silence." "You want us to pull back?" "No. I want Wolfe to stay sharp. If there's any loose thread in the Holloway files, any accomplice he hasn't named, I want it now." I told Wolfe as soon as I hung up. He listened unmoving, the only sign of tension the slow flex of his fingers on the armrest. "He knew we were close," Wolfe said. "He fled not to avoid prosecution, but to preserve influence." "Which means he left someone behind to manage it." I nodded. "A fixer, or a replacement." I fetched the Holloway file from the drawer, the original ledger. Wolfe asked for the donor spreadsheet again, and I laid it out on the table beside his beer glass. He studied it carefully, like a man parsing scripture. Then he grunted. "Here," I leaned over. "A name. Hiram Kessler. Not familiar." "Who is he?" "A lawyer," Wolfe said. "Ransom's institutional proxy. His name appears on the deed to the Red Hook facility, buried in a shell company called K1 Holdings. He never appeared at the Met, never signed a check, but every one of the suspect donations routes through him. Meaning, he's the man left. Behind?" Wolfe nodded once. "And he will attempt to erase what's left. We moved quickly after that. I made calls, starting with Saul, who was already en route to Kessler's known office. Then I reached Claire," she answered, voice tight. "Is this about the photo?" "You shouldn't stay alone." "I'm not. The officer Kramer posted is outside." "Good. Wolfe found a name, Kessler. He's Ransom's shadow. I'll give it to the Met's internal review board. They're moving fast now. Everyone's terrified. Some board members are stepping down. And you?" "I'm staying. There's a cataloging initiative launching next month. My mother's name will be attached." I smiled faintly. "Good." Back in the office, Wolfe finally relaxed when he heard that Saul had found Kessler's office locked, files being shredded, computers pulled apart. Kramer had arrived in time to seize what remained. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a severed tether. By dusk, the phone rang again. It was Kramer. "He'll stay gone," he said of Ransom, "but his reach is clipped. Kessler's done. We're building the case quietly. You did your job." Wolfe didn't respond to praise. He merely said, "Claire Bennington? She's protected and credited." Good. As we hung up, Wolfe looked at the spoon again, then closed the drawer for the last time. "That will be all, Archie." But I didn't leave. I stood there watching him. He didn't move. Finally I said, "You ever think about what would have happened if Lucy hadn't bent that spoon?" Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "No," he said. Because she did. And that for him was answer enough. The next morning I came downstairs expecting quiet. Instead I found Wolfe already at his desk, surrounded by the trappings of agitation, 2 opened dictionaries, a fresh yellow notepad, and the spoon. Yes, the spoon, removed from the drawer and resting squarely in front of him. He was frowning at it like it had interrupted his breakfast. I thought we'd wrap this up, I said, easing into my chair. Ransoms in the wind, Kessler's singing to the feds, and the Met's got a new cataloguing initiative named after Eloise Bennington. All's well. Fooey, Wolfe said, not looking up. I waited. Nothing. No elaboration. Just that expressive grunt that meant something was out of place in the cathedral of his mind. So I leaned forward. If you're about to tell me this, whole thing was more complicated than it already was. You're going to owe Fritz a bottle of Armagnac. He didn't crack a smile. He lifted the spoon delicately and turned it over in his hand. Archie, he said, you asked once why Lucy bent it. I remember. You assumed it was symbolism, a private message. Was I wrong? No. But you missed the other reason. He set the spoon down again, this time at an angle, pointing, as ever, northward. She bent it to measure something, Wolfe said. I stared at him. What exactly does a spoon measure? Not what. Where? He stood, actually stood, and walked to the globe in the corner. Gave it a spin with one heavy finger. The spoon was bent deliberately, yes, but not arbitrarily. It pointed in a direction, not due north but off by 9 degrees, toward the northwest. I raised a brow. You're telling me this is a compass now? Not by design, Wolfe said, but by function. And I suspect it was aligned to a specific space. Something Lucy could not describe in words, something she wanted Claire to investigate. Something, what, physical? Possibly, possibly not, but I require confirmation. Which is how 2 hours later I found myself back at the Met, this time in the storage wing, with Kristen Lynn leading me past a row of sealed cabinets and down a narrow corridor that smelled like dust, linen, and scholarly tension. This is the Holloway Annex, she said. Most of it's inactive. We've left the layout untouched until the audit finishes. We stopped in front of the cabinet where the spoon had originally sat. Kristen unlocked it with a soft click. Inside, the velvet mounts remained along with the labels. But one space, of course, was still empty. I pulled out the spoon Wolfe had insisted I bring, turned it until the bent tip pointed outward, and followed its angle across the room. It pointed very nearly to a small sealed drawer labeled H17G, Declerk Panel Components, Pending Review. Kristen frowned. That drawer's sealed. It was locked for independent appraisal after your visit. Museum protocol. Can you open it? She hesitated, then nodded. We're past protocol now. Inside was a stack of glass panels. Some intact, others flaked at the edges like old sugar. One, near the top, had a faint engraving in the corner. Not the forgery signature Wolfe had already identified, but another mark tucked inside a small etching of a garden spade. Kristen's breath caught. I've seen this. You recognize it? It's a maker's cipher. It was noted in Eloise Bennington's early drafts for the Holloway exhibit, but she struck it from the final version. Why? Because it wasn't in the official documentation. No supporting records. It would have raised too many questions. I took out my phone and snapped several photos, then copied the drawer number and the label. Wolfe, predictably, had an answer ready when I returned. It's not de Klerk's, he said, after reviewing the image. It's from a secondary artist who worked with de Klerk briefly, a man named Anton Giraud. He opened a ledger on his desk and pointed to a line. One of the ransom acquisitions, a matching pane acquired through a blind lot, bears this same mark. But that piece was reported destroyed in a shipment accident 5 years ago. I felt the connection snap into place. So there were 2 panels, I said. Matching. One was forged and submitted. The other, this one, was real. Or authentic enough, Wolfe said. The spoon pointed not to the forgery, but to the truth buried beside it. A buried signature. A map within the exhibit. She wanted someone to find it, I said. Claire or Lucy. Wolfe leaned back. That drawer may be the final nail. The mark alone proves Ransom's laundering method. He submitted 2 panels, one false, one genuine. The real one was hidden, the fake was appraised, and the damage was staged to explain the mismatch. And once Eloise spotted the signature, it unraveled. Exactly, Wolfe said, which means we must inform Kramer. This time Wolfe made the call himself. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Kramer stepped inside, a coat dusted with rain and a face like he hadn't slept. You found something. Correction, Wolfe said. Miss Bennington's mother. Found something. We merely followed her map. He passed the photos across the desk. Kramer examined them, his brows furrowed. That mark's registered, he said. It's flagged in customs for black market movement. And now, Wolfe said, you have physical proof that Ransom attempted to pass it off as destroyed, while using its match to build a false provenance. The loop is closed. Kramer folded the images carefully, tucked them into his pocket and nodded. Ransom won't come back, but we've got his method. That's enough to root out the rest. There's going to be hell to pay. No doubt, Wolfe said. After Kramer left, Wolfe returned to his orchids. I poured myself a drink and sat by the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the clouds had parted just enough to let in a blade of late afternoon light. Claire called just after 5. They're making the announcement, she said. The museum's releasing a statement. My mother will be formally recognized for exposing the breach in provenance records. The boards endorsed it unanimously. Good, I said. She earned that. I don't think she ever wanted credit, Claire added. She just wanted someone to see what was broken and fix it. She bent the truth, I said, just far enough for someone to follow it. Claire was quiet a moment. Thank you, Archie. When she hung up, I closed the office drawer one last time and left the spoon where it lay, bent, silent, and finally understood. The brownstone was quiet again. Not in the usual way it is between cases, when Wolfe slips back into his orchid den and I start itching to stir the pot, but with a deeper kind of stillness. One that meant we hadn't just solved a case, we'd turned over something bigger. And the dust hadn't quite settled. Claire Bennington came by 3 days after the Met released its formal statement. She brought a small envelope and a look of fragile peace. I met her at the door. They're holding a memorial exhibition, she said. Small, quiet. My mother's private collection, some of the pieces she loved most but never felt the need to show off. The board approved it. Unanimously, Kristen's curating it. That sounds fitting, I said. Something real in a place that needed it. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a photograph, the spoon, displayed on a velvet mount under a soft beam of light. Beside it, the engraved panel from the storage drawer, marked and authenticated. She asked me to give this to Mr. Wolfe, she said, and to tell him the museum finally learned how to read. I didn't need to guess who she was. Wolfe received it without comment, his brows lifting slightly as he studied the image. He held it like he might a rare leaf clipping, fragile, interesting, not to be mishandled. Miss Lynn has some intelligence, he said. Claire smiled. She has resolve. That's harder. She will need it. She knows. Wolfe leaned back, hands folded on his belly. You intend to stay? I do. He nodded. Then it is yours to defend, not with bluster, with precision. Claire looked at him a moment longer as if trying to read something in the lines of his face. You know, she said quietly. You didn't have to take my case. You didn't even believe me at first. I believed in the spoon, Wolfe said simply. It was enough. After she left, Wolfe returned to his reading. I filed the photo in our case log, right between the ransom ledger and a copy of Lucy Trammell's written statement, now part of an ongoing federal inquiry. Saul, last I heard, was in D.C., testifying before a subcommittee that suddenly had a keen interest in how private collections become public trophies without passing through truth. Ransom hadn't surfaced. I didn't expect him to, but his shadow had thinned. His name wouldn't fund another wing, not now. That evening, Wolfe and I took dinner in the dining room, braised rabbit in mustard sauce, haricots verts, and a tart made with pears so perfectly sliced they looked drafted by compass. Fritz was in top form. Halfway through the meal, Wolfe set down his fork. A single alteration, he said, and the entire structure shifted. I nodded. Lucy bent it with her hands. Ransom bent the truth with a checkbook. Different kinds. Of sabotage. No, Wolfe said. One was sabotage, the other was restoration. That gave me pause. You think Lucy's act, bending the spoon, put things back where they belonged? I think, Wolfe said, that she returned control to those who had lost it. It is no small thing to act in silence. We didn't speak much after that. We never do when the air's already full of conclusions. Later, I poured myself a brandy and sat with the logbook. Case closed, spoon filed. But it lingered in my mind, how one simple warped shape cracked a pristine illusion wide open. I thought of Eloise Bennington, alone in her office, finding that signature. I thought of Lucy, hands shaking as she repositioned the spoon just so, trusting that someone, Claire, would see what no one else did. And I thought of Wolfe, unmoved by theatre but stirred by symmetry, guiding the truth into daylight like a conductor pulling a melody out of static. By midnight I was ready to call it a night, but Wolfe, still in his chair, looked over as I passed by. Archie. Yeah? You were right. I blinked. About what? He tilted his head toward the drawer. It was poetry. That, from Wolfe, was thunder in a whisper. I let the corner of my mouth tilt upward. Remind me to write that down. And I did. Right then, in ink, in the final page of the file. Case closed. Poetry delivered. Justice, in its own odd rhythm, restored. Then, I turned out the lights and left the spoon, quiet, curved, and honest in the dark where it had always spoken best.